The House of a Headless Man. Chapter 1. An Invitation to Greystone. It was on a particularly stifling Tuesday afternoon in July of 1933 that I found myself once again ascending the familiar stairs to my friend Hercule Poirot's flat in Whitehaven Mansions. The oppressive heat that had gripped London for the past fortnight showed no signs of abating, and I confess that the prospect of Poirot's meticulously climate-controlled rooms provided no small measure of anticipated relief. I had returned from Argentina not 3 weeks prior, having finally settled the tedious matter of my late cousin's estancia, a venture that had proved far more complex than initially supposed. The English summer, which I had nostalgically yearned for during those long months in Buenos Aires, now seemed determined to rival the South American heat in its intensity. Georges, Poirot's invaluable manservant, admitted me with his customary discretion. "Monsieur Poirot is in the sitting-room, Captain Hastings. He has been expecting you." Indeed, I found my old friend precisely where I had anticipated, seated in his favourite chair, impeccably dressed despite the weather in a light grey suit that showed not the slightest sign of wilting. Before him on the small table lay his correspondence, arranged with geometric precision. "Ah, mon bon Hastings," he exclaimed, rising to greet me with genuine warmth. "You arrive at a most opportune moment. Sit, and tell me, how does England receive her prodigal son?" "Rather too warmly, I'm afraid," I replied, gratefully accepting the iced tisane that George had silently materialized to offer. "Though I suppose one shouldn't complain after demanding English weather for so long." Poirot's eyes twinkled with amusement. "The English and their weather, it is a romance that never satisfies, n'est-ce pas? But tell me, your affairs in Argentina, they are concluded satisfactorily?" "Finally, yes. Though I must say, Poirot, South American bureaucracy could teach even the French a thing or two about complexity." I paused, noting a particular letter among his correspondence that seemed to have been read and reread several times. "But what of you? Any interesting cases to report?" Poirot's fingers drummed thoughtfully upon the arm of his chair, a gesture I recognized as indicating some matter of particular interest. "Perhaps, mon ami, perhaps. Tell me, what do you know of the Hargreaves family of Suffolk?" I considered for a moment. "Hargreaves. The name seems familiar. Wait, wasn't there a Josiah Hargreaves who made his fortune in imports? I seem to recall some scandal, though it was before my time." "Précisément. Josiah Hargreaves died in 1901 under circumstances that were, shall we say, somewhat ambiguous. His widow, Lady Celia, remarried a Colonel Hargreaves, a distant cousin of her late husband. Curiously enough, the Colonel himself passed away 5 years ago." "Rather complicated family arrangements," I observed. "Indeed. And now regardez." Poirot handed me the letter he had been studying. "Lady Celia writes to me in great distress." The letter was written in a trembling, elderly hand, on expensive but slightly yellowed stationery. "Dear Monsieur Poirot, I write to you in the utmost confidence regarding a matter of extreme delicacy. My son Nigel has recently made a discovery at Greystone House that threatens to destroy everything our family has built over these many years. I dare not commit the details to paper, but I implore you to come at once. Discretion is paramount. The local authorities must not be involved under any circumstances. I have enclosed a check for your initial expenses and await your response with the greatest anxiety. Yours in desperate hope, Lady Celia Hargreaves." "Intriguing," I said, returning the letter, though rather vague. "What do you make of it?" Poirot was already on his feet, moving with surprising energy toward his desk. "What I make of it, Hastings, is that we must depart for Suffolk immediately. George, Please telephone the station and reserve 2 first-class tickets on the 4:15 to Ipswich." "We?" I asked, though I was already reaching for my hat. "Surely this is a matter for the local police if it's as serious as the lady suggests." "Ah, but she specifically requests that they not be involved. And when a lady of Lady Celia's standing makes such a request—" Poirot spread his hands expressively. "Besides, mon ami, you have just returned from your tropical exile. What better way to reacquaint yourself with the English countryside than a little excursion to Suffolk?" The train journey proved most illuminating. We had secured a first-class compartment to ourselves, and Poirot used the time to expand upon the Hargreaves family history. The first Josiah Hargreaves built his fortune in the import trade, tea, spices, various Oriental goods. He had a partner, one Theodore Blackwood, who managed the London operations while Hargreaves handled the foreign suppliers. By all accounts, they were remarkably successful. But something went wrong. In 1901, Blackwood disappeared. Simply vanished, as they say. He was supposed to have gone abroad on business, but... Poirot shrugged delicately. And then, merely 2 months later, Josiah Hargreaves died. Heart failure, the death certificate stated. "Convenient," I observed. "Your word, not mine, mon cher Hastings. But yes, convenient indeed for certain parties." Our conversation was interrupted by the entrance of a sharp-featured woman of perhaps 60 years, dressed in serviceable tweeds despite the heat. "Oh, I do beg your pardon. I thought this compartment was empty." "Not at all, madame." Poirot rose politely. "Please join us if you wish." She settled herself with an economy of movement that suggested a lifetime of making herself comfortable in various situations. "Thank you. I'm Miss Cartwright, Miss Prudence Cartwright. I couldn't help but overhear. You're heading to the Greystone area?" "We are," I confirmed, while Poirot observed our new companion with interest. "Ah!" Miss Cartwright's expression became knowing. "Going to see Lady Celia, I shouldn't wonder. The whole village has been talking about the goings-on up at the house." "Indeed?" Poirot's tone was carefully neutral. "Oh, yes. Young Mr. Nigel has been poking about in places better left alone, if you ask me. That east wing has been sealed since the old master's time." "Some doors, monsieur?" She had noticed Poirot's nationality with remarkable astuteness. "Are meant to stay closed." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "They say on autumn nights you can still see him, the Headless Horseman of Greystone. Been riding those grounds since 1901, searching for what was taken from him." "A local legend, I presume?" I asked. Miss Cartwright's eyes glinted. "Call it what you will, Captain, but old sins cast long shadows, and Greystone House has shadows aplenty." The remainder of the journey passed in desultory conversation, though I noticed Poirot's eyes rarely left our travelling companion. As we approached Ipswich, Miss Cartwright gathered her belongings. "If you're staying at the house," she said, pausing at the compartment door, "mind you keep your wits about you. That family has secrets, and secrets have a way of demanding payment with interest." As the train pulled into the station and we prepared to disembark, Poirot touched my arm. "Most interesting note to Miss Cartwright, wouldn't you say?" "Village gossip?" I suggested. "Every old house has its ghost stories." "Perhaps. But notice, Hastings, she knew immediately who we were and where we were bound. In my experience, such prescience rarely occurs by chance." The platform at Ipswich was mercifully shaded, and we soon located the car Lady Celia had sent. As we drove through the Suffolk countryside, past fields golden with ripening wheat, I found myself reflecting on the curious nature of our summons. Whatever young Nigel Hargreaves had discovered in that sealed wing had clearly disturbed more than just his mother's peace of mind. The first glimpse of Greystone House, rising from behind a screen of ancient elms, did nothing to dispel the gathering sense of unease that had been building since Miss Cartwright's ominous warnings. The Georgian facade, handsome though it was, seemed to brood under the afternoon sun, its many windows reflecting the light like watchful eyes. Chapter 2. The Sealed Wing. The gravel drive curved through an avenue of chestnuts before delivering us to the principal entrance of Greystone House. As our motor car drew to a halt, I observed the peculiar stillness that seemed to envelop the entire establishment. No gardener tending the somewhat neglected borders, no groom appearing from the stables, none of the customary bustle one associates with a country house in summer. The very air seemed to hold its breath. Lady Celia Hargreaves awaited us in the entrance hall, a woman whose breeding was evident in every line of her bearing, despite the unmistakable signs of distress. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair arranged in the fashion of an earlier era, and hands that trembled slightly as she extended them in greeting. Her black silk dress, though of excellent quality, showed the subtle signs of careful preservation that suggested genteel poverty masked by good management. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice cultivated but unsteady, "how very good of you to come so promptly. And Captain Hastings? I have heard so much about you from my late husband. He served in India, you know, and always spoke highly of military men." The entrance hall itself commanded attention. A magnificent space with a sweeping staircase and walls adorned with family portraits spanning, I judged, at least 2 centuries. Yet there was something disturbing about several of these paintings. The faces had been deliberately scratched out, leaving only the costly frames and the ghostly remnants of once proud ancestors. "Perhaps," suggested Poirot gently, "we might retire somewhere more private for our discussion." Of course. How thoughtless of me." Lady Celia led us through to a morning room that overlooked what had once been formal gardens, but now showed signs of economic retrenchment. "I should introduce you to the household. They are all quite anxious about your arrival." As if summoned by her words, several figures appeared in the doorway. The first was a young man of perhaps 30, with the kind of intelligent, sensitive face one associates with scholars rather than country squires. This was evidently Nigel Hargreaves, whose discovery had precipitated our summons. "Mother, you shouldn't have troubled Monsieur Poirot," he said, though his relief at our presence was palpable. "I'm certain there's a perfectly rational explanation." "Rational?" The word came from a striking young woman who had followed him into the room. This could only be Diana Hargreaves, and I was immediately struck by the contrast between her beauty and the bitterness that twisted her features. "Really, Nigel, even you cannot be so naive." Behind them came a man of middle years, perhaps 55, with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that suggested a lifetime of managing other people's affairs. His morning coat was impeccable, his manner proprietorial. "Reginald Forthright," he announced himself, extending a hand that was firm but somehow unpleasant in its dampness. "I manage the family's financial interests, Lady Celia's brother-in-law through her first marriage." "And this," Nigel intervened, gesturing to a younger man who had remained by the door, "is my friend Dr. Marcus Pemberton. He's visiting from Oxford, specializes in alienist work, criminal psychology, that sort of thing." Dr. Pemberton was a curious figure, intense, dark eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, the kind of man who seemed to observe everything while revealing nothing. His handshake was brief, his attention already focused on Poirot, with professional interest. "Monsieur Poirot's reputation precedes him," he murmured. "I've read your monograph on the psychology of the poisoner with great interest." An elderly butler had appeared, so ancient and desiccated that he seemed almost part of the house's architecture. "Shall I serve tea, my lady?" "Yes, Jennings, thank you." Lady Celia's voice held a note of affection for the old retainer. "Jennings has been with us since 1900. He knew my first husband well." The butler's face remained impassive, though I noticed his hands trembled slightly as he withdrew. Poirot, I observed, noticed it too. "Now then," Poirot settled himself precisely in his chair, "perhaps you would be so good as to explain the nature of young Monsieur Nigel's discovery?" Nigel cleared his throat nervously. "I've been cataloguing the house for the Historical Preservation Society. We're hoping to secure a grant for restoration, you see. The East Wing has been sealed since 1901, after a fire, supposedly, though the damage must have been minimal as the structure remains sound." "You broke in?" Diana's tone was accusatory. "Despite Mother explicitly forbidding it." "The historical value," Nigel began, but his mother interrupted. "What's done is done," Lady Celia said wearily. "Monsieur Poirot needs to understand what you found." "Perhaps," suggested Poirot, "it would be best if we were shown this discovery directly." The procession to the East Wing was conducted in near silence, our footsteps echoing through corridors that grew progressively more neglected. I noticed that several clocks we passed had stopped, their hands frozen at different hours, as if time itself had given up on this portion of the house. "Tell me," Poirot addressed Lady Celia as we walked, "your first husband's business partner, Mr. Theodore Blackwood, you knew him well?" Lady Celia's step faltered momentarily. "He was a frequent guest, a bachelor, you understand, and Josiah felt sorry for him. They had been partners since their youth. And his departure in 1901, it was unexpected." "Everything about that year was unexpected," Reginald Forthright interjected smoothly. The business was facing certain challenges: colonial unrest, trade disputes. Blackwood's departure was merely one difficulty among many. We had reached a heavy oak door, its surface marked by decades of undisturbed dust save for the recent violence of its forcing. Nigel produced a lamp. The electricity had never been extended to this wing. "I must warn you," he said quietly, "what lies within is disturbing." The door swung open onto a corridor that seemed to exhale the breath of decades. Our lamp cast dancing shadows on walls where the wallpaper hung in melancholy strips. Yet, despite the decay, there were signs that this had once been a magnificent part of the house: elaborate cornices, a beautiful if dusty Persian runner, doors of solid mahogany. "The family apartments," Lady Celia whispered. "Josiah's private study was here." Nigel led us to a door that stood ajar. "This is where I found it." The room beyond was frozen in time, furniture shrouded in dust sheets, heavy curtains drawn against sunlight that had ceased to matter decades ago. But it was the figure in the chair by the cold fireplace that drew every eye and stopped every breath. Even in the lamplight, the theatrical quality of the scene was unmistakable. The skeleton, still dressed in the formal evening wear of a bygone era, sat upright in a wing-backed chair, positioned as though it had been reading a newspaper that had long since crumbled to dust. The skull, however, was conspicuously absent, leaving the collar and cravat to frame an absence that seemed to mock the very idea of identity. "Mon Dieu," Poirot breathed, moving forward with careful steps. "How very deliberate." Dr. Pemberton pushed past us, his professional interest overcoming any natural revulsion. "Fascinating. The precision of the decapitation suggests medical knowledge, or at least anatomical familiarity." "Must you?" Diana's voice was sharp with distress. "The shoes," Poirot murmured, kneeling beside the chair. "Observe the shoes, Hastings?" I looked and saw what he meant. While the evening dress was of the fashion of 1901, the shoes seemed somehow wrong, newer, as if they had been added later. And see here. Poirot indicated the floor around the chair. The dust, it has been disturbed, but not recently. Someone has swept it into patterns as if tidying around the chair. Most peculiar. A pocket watch hung from the skeleton's waistcoat, its gold case tarnished but intact. Poirot carefully extracted it, revealing that it had stopped at precisely 7:12. Morning or evening, one wonders, he mused. Surely, Reginald Forthright said with forced heartiness, this is some old smuggling business. These old houses are full of such tales. We should simply notify the authorities and— No! Lady Celia's vehemence surprised everyone. Surely Monsieur Poirot should complete his investigation first. Jennings had appeared in the doorway, his ancient face even paler than usual. Begging your pardon, my lady, but Inspector Jellicoe from the County Constabulary has arrived. Someone in the village informed him of unusual activities at the house. As we prepared to return to receive the inspector, I noticed Poirot carefully pocketing the stopped watch. His eyes met mine, and in them I read a message clear as words. This was no ancient crime, no smuggler's tale. Whatever had happened in this room touched directly upon the living, and the dead were not yet done with their revelations. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows through the neglected wing as we made our solemn procession back to the inhabited portions of the house. Behind us, the headless figure continued its eternal vigil, a guardian of secrets that had already waited 32 years to be discovered. Chapter 3. The Discovery of Horror. Inspector Jellicoe proved to be precisely the sort of provincial official one might expect to encounter in rural Suffolk, a man whose considerable girth suggested a fondness for local ale, and whose florid complexion spoke of many years spent in pursuit of poachers across windswept moors. His manner, as he stood in Lady Celia's morning-room, oscillated between obsequious deference to the gentry and barely concealed irritation at what he clearly considered foreign interference. "Now then, your ladyship," he began, producing a notebook with theatrical deliberation. "I'm given to understand there's been some discovery in the house. Bones, I'm told. Old bones, from what the village has been saying." The speed with which news had travelled to the village struck me as remarkable, though perhaps I should not have been surprised. In my experience of English country life, the servants' network operates with an efficiency that would put the telegraph system to shame. I noticed Jennings standing near the door, his ancient face a study in careful neutrality. "Perhaps," Poirot suggested with exquisite politeness, "the inspector would care to view the scene himself before drawing any conclusions?" Jellicoe's eyes narrowed slightly at this presumption from a foreigner, but Lady Celia's quick intervention prevented any unpleasantness. "Monsieur Poirot is here at my personal invitation, Inspector. I would be grateful if you would extend him every courtesy." The procession back to the east wing had swelled considerably with Jellicoe's addition, along with a nervous young constable who seemed overwhelmed by the grandeur of his surroundings. As we retraced our steps through those neglected corridors, I observed how differently each member of our party reacted to the renewed journey. Diana walked with rigid determination, as though facing an unpleasant duty that must be endured. Jules appeared increasingly agitated, running his fingers through his hair in a gesture that had already become familiar. Reginald Forthright maintained his air of professional composure, though I noticed he kept checking his pocket watch, a nervous habit, perhaps, or simply impatience with the proceedings. Dr. Pemberton, by contrast, showed an eagerness that seemed almost indecent. "Inspector," he said, falling into step beside Jellicoe, "I've made something of a study of historical crime scenes. The preservation here could tell us a great deal about methods and motives from the period." "Historical, you say?" Jellicoe's tone was sceptical. "Well, that's as may be. In my experience, Doctor, old bones are usually smugglers' work. These old houses along the coast, they're riddled with secret passages and hiding places from the free trade days." We reached the sealed wing once more, and I noticed how the quality of light had changed since our earlier visit. The afternoon sun now slanted through gaps in the boarded windows, creating bars of golden illumination in which dust motes danced like spirits disturbed from their rest. The effect was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. As we entered the room containing the headless skeleton, Inspector Jellicoe's reaction was surprisingly muted. He surveyed the scene with the air of a man who has seen too much to be easily surprised, though the constable beside him had gone quite pale. "Well, well," Jellicoe muttered, circling the chair with ponderous steps. "Staged, obviously. Someone's idea of a joke, perhaps. These university types—" He shot a meaningful glance at Nigel. "They go in for this sort of elaborate prank." "A prank that required decapitating a corpse?" Poirot's tone was mild, but the challenge was unmistakable. "And then dressing it in evening wear of considerable quality. Observe, Inspector, the fabric of this coat, the stitching, the cut. This is Saville row work, not some costumier's prop." I moved closer myself, noting details I had missed in our initial shock. The skeleton's fingers were positioned deliberately on the chair arms, and a signet ring still adorned the left hand. The evening dress, despite its age, showed careful arrangement. Someone had taken time to position every fold, every detail. "The dust patterns," Poirot continued, kneeling beside the chair. "They tell a most interesting story. See here, and here." His fingers traced shapes in the air above the floor. "Someone has swept around this chair, but not recently. The dust has settled in these patterns over many years, yet here—" He indicated a different area. "There are signs of more recent disturbance, as if someone has visited this room within the last few months." "Preposterous," Reginald Forthright interjected. "The door was sealed. Nigel had to break it down." "The door to the corridor, yes," Poirot agreed. "But observe the windows, Monsieur Forthright. That boarding is not original. Someone has replaced it, perhaps more than once over the years." Jellicoe had been making notes with increasing reluctance. "Be that as it may, this is clearly an old matter. I'll have the remains removed for proper burial, and that will be an end to it." "No!" The vehemence came from an unexpected source, old Jennings, who had been standing silent in the doorway. All eyes turned to him as he seemed to realize what he had done, his weathered face flushing with embarrassment. "What my butler means," Lady Celia said quickly, "is that we would prefer to handle this matter with appropriate discretion. Surely, Inspector, you understand the delicacy of our position?" But Poirot had already crossed to where Jennings stood. "You know something about this, mon vieux. I see it in your eyes. This is not unknown to you." The old butler's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before he managed, "I've served this family faithfully for 33 years, sir. I know my duty." "Duty to whom?" Diana's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "To the living or the dead, Jennings?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. It was at this moment that Dr. Pemberton, who had been examining the skeleton with professional detachment, made an observation that changed everything. "The decapitation," he announced, "was performed with considerable skill. The cervical vertebrae show a clean separation between C3 and C4, precisely where one would cut if one knew anatomy. And there's something else." He had lifted the skeleton's right hand, examining it closely. "Defensive wounds on the metacarpals. This person fought before they died." "Murder, then?" Inspector Jellicoe said with evident satisfaction. "Well, that settles it. This is a police matter now." As if in response to his pronouncement, a sudden gust of wind rattled the boarded windows, sending a shower of dust through the room. In that swirling cloud, illuminated by the slanted sunlight, I could have sworn I saw the outline of a figure, tall, headless, reaching out with desperate hands. But when the dust settled, there was only the skeleton in its chair, maintaining its grotesque parody of domestic tranquility. That evening, as we gathered for dinner, the atmosphere was electric with suppressed tension. Inspector Jellicoe had departed with stern warnings about not leaving the county, though he had agreed to delay removing the skeleton until the following day. I observed with interest that Jennings was not serving at table. The duty had fallen to a parlour-maid who seemed terrified of making any mistake. "Where is Jennings?" Poirot inquired casually, as the soup was served. "He was indisposed," Lady Celia replied, though her eyes did not meet his. "The shock of today's discoveries, you understand?" Through the dining-room windows I could see the gardens falling into darkness. But there, near what appeared to be an old gardener's bonfire, a figure moved, stooped, furtive, feeding papers into the flames. Even at this distance, I recognized Jennings' characteristic gait. After dinner, Poirot drew me aside. "Mon cher Hastings, our friend Jennings is destroying evidence. But of what? And why now, after all these years?" Before I could respond, Miss Prudence Cartwright was announced. She swept into the drawing-room with the air of one who brings important news. "I felt I should call," she announced, settling herself without invitation. "Given the extraordinary events of today, you should know, Lady Celia, that the village is quite agitated. Old Tom Beverley swears he saw the Headless Horseman last night riding across your east lawn." "Nonsense!" Reginald Forthright said sharply. "Is it?" Miss Cartwright's eyes glinted. "The horseman first appeared in September of 1901, just after the fire in the East Wing. My mother saw him herself, a figure in evening dress, searching the grounds, calling out for something lost, or someone." She paused, dramatically. "They say he's looking for his head, of course. But I've always wondered if perhaps he's looking for his murderer." The silence that followed her pronouncement was profound. Lady Celia had gone very pale, and I noticed her hands trembling as she reached for her tea. Whatever secrets Greystone House harboured, it was clear that the discovery of the headless skeleton was not the end, but merely the beginning of our journey into the shadows of the past. Chapter 4. Shadows of the Past. The morning following Miss Cartwright's dramatic pronouncement dawned grey and oppressive, with thunderclouds massing on the eastern horizon like an army preparing for siege. I had spent a restless night in the Blue Room, so called for its faded azure wallpaper, wrestling with dreams in which headless figures wandered endless corridors, searching for something perpetually beyond reach. The house itself seemed to breathe uneasily in the pre-dawn hours, its timbers creaking with secrets too long contained. I found Poirot already at breakfast, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, studying a sheaf of papers with the intensity he usually reserved for examining physical evidence. The dining room was otherwise empty, the family apparently choosing to avoid both each other and the inevitable continuation of yesterday's investigations. "Ah, Hastings," he greeted me, not lifting his eyes from his documents. "Tell me, what did you observe about our excellent Jennings last evening?" I helped myself to kidneys and bacon from the sideboard, considering my response. Beyond his rather suspicious bonfire activities, the man seemed genuinely distressed, though whether from guilt or fear I couldn't say. "Précisément. And what burns a man at night that cannot wait for morning? Only that which he fears will be discovered